When the alien girl found the human dying in the alleyway, she should have turned him over to the cruel Talaxian police, knowing that harboring a human meant a fate worse than death. Instead, Zephyr carried his bleeding body back to her hideout and spent sleepless nights nursing the gravely injured space marine back to health, unaware that she had just risked everything for a human soldier named Stephen Williams on a desperate mission to save both their worlds from annihilation. Stephen had been shot down during a ferocious space battle against the ruthless Talaxian Empire. His ship destroyed and his body broken, he barely managed to eject in an escape pod before slamming into the surface of the alien planet Talax. Zephyr discovered him there, hidden amongst the rubble of a bombed-out city. She was an outcast among her own kind, shunned and abandoned because of her unique purple skin, seen as an ill omen in Talaxian culture. At first they circled each other warily, human and Talaxian, each expecting the other to lash out in violence. But slowly, through pain and blood and the shared struggle to survive, an unlikely bond began to form between them. Two outcasts, rejected by their own societies, brought together by the strange tides of fate. As Stephen healed, he uncovered a terrible secret. The militaristic Talaxians were preparing a massive invasion fleet to enslave his home planet Earth. With dawning horror, he realized that the survival of the entire human race rested on his badly wounded shoulders. If he couldn't find a way to warn Earth in time, billions would perish under the merciless alien onslaught. Zephyr aided Stephen as he carried out dangerous recon missions to uncover weaknesses in the Talaxian war machine. Together, they discovered a rare mineral deep in the planet's core that powered the aliens' ships and weapons. If they could sabotage the mineral extractors, it would cripple the Talaxians' ability to wage war. But it wasn't just humanity's fate that hung in the balance. Stephen saw firsthand the cruelty of the tyrannical Talaxian leaders and how they crushed anyone who dared to be different, like Zephyr. He vowed to not only save his own people, but to help her overthrow the despots and bring freedom to the oppressed masses of Talax. To do all that, Stephen would first have to pull off an impossible feat, infiltrate the heavily fortified Talaxian stronghold and send a warning to Earth from their communications center. It was a suicide mission. He'd have no one to rely on except Zephyr and the skills he'd honed through a lifetime of battle. As Stephen prepared for what he knew could be his final mission, he understood with calm certainty that failure was not an option. The fate of two worlds, his newfound friend, and everyone he'd ever loved, rested in his scarred, worn hands. And so, in a distant galaxy on an alien world, a human soldier and an outcast girl readied themselves to fight for the future of their races. Their friendship forged in the crucible of war, a bright spark against the looming darkness. Stephen dons the Talaxian armor Zephyr acquired, the alien material feeling heavy and foreign against his skin. He runs his fingers over the unfamiliar controls, committing their positions to memory. Zephyr adjusts the fit, her nimble fingers making small, precise adjustments until the disguise is seamless. "You look just like one of them," she says, a hint of unease in her voice, like any other Talaxian soldier. Stephen nods grimly. "Good, that's the point." They wait for darkness to descend, watching the stronghold's perimeter from their hidden vantage point. Guards patrol in strict formations, their movements clinical and precise. Spotlights sweep the area, probing for any signs of intrusion. As the moons rise, Stephen and Zephyr make their move. They creep through the shadows, Stephen's human tech scanning for weaknesses in the security net. A vulnerability appears in the shield matrix. With a few quick keystrokes, Stephen slices through the system's defenses, opening a narrow window. They slip inside, the stronghold's walls looming above them. The corridors stretch out in a dizzying maze, a labyrinth of steel and shadow. Stephen's combat instincts hum, alert for any sign of danger. Zephyr takes the lead, her knowledge of Talaxian protocols guiding them through the twists and turns. Patrols march past, their steps echoing in the confines of the hallways. Stephen and Zephyr press themselves into alcoves, hardly daring to breathe. Stephen's heart pounds, adrenaline surging through his veins. They remain motionless, statues in the darkness, until the patrols pass. Deeper they go, descending into the stronghold's core. Security grows tighter, the checkpoints more frequent. They bluff their way past guards, Stephen's disguise and Zephyr's quick thinking, allowing them to pass unhindered. At last, they reach the communications center. The door looms before them, a final barrier. Stephen's hands fly over the access panel, his tech worming into the system's code. The lock disengages with a hiss. Inside, the room hums with activity, screens flickering with data. Stephen rushes to the central console, his fingers already inputting commands. Zephyr watches the door, her body tense and coiled. The warning message compiles, Earth's coordinates locked in. Stephen hits the upload command, watching the progress bar inch forward. 90%, 95%. Alarms shatter the air. Red light floods the room, casting sinister shadows. Zephyr's head whips around, fear and dedication warring on her face. "They've found us," she says, her voice tight. The door blasts open, Talaxian soldiers pouring into the room. Energy bolts sizzle through the air, scorching the walls. Stephen reacts instantly, his rifle snapping up. He fires, the human weapon roaring in the confined space. Talaxians fall, their armor no match for Stephen's precision. He moves with deadly grace, a whirlwind of motion, always keeping himself between the enemy and Zephyr. She shouts directions over the chaos, guiding their retreat. They plunge into the maintenance tunnels, the sounds of pursuit close behind. Stephen leads the way, his helmet's display mapping their route. They scramble through the narrow passages, the walls pressing in around them. Bursting out into the night air, they sprint across the open ground. Alarms wail behind them, spotlights stabbing through the darkness. Energy bolts sizzle past, the Talaxians firing wildly. A shuttle sits on a nearby landing pad, its hatch open. Stephen races up the ramp, Zephyr close on his heels. His hands fly over the controls, the engines roaring to life. The shuttle leaps into the air, anti-aircraft fire streaking past the viewports. Stephen weaves and dodges, pushing the shuttle to its limits. The stronghold recedes behind them, a dark monolith against the stars. They break atmosphere, the sky giving way to the endless expanse of space. A chime sounds from the console. Stephen's heart leaps as he reads the message. The warning reached Earth. The human fleet is preparing, readying itself for the fight to come. But the battle is just the beginning. Stephen and Zephyr exchange a glance, their faces grim. The mineral extractors await, the key to the Talaxians' power. They must be destroyed no matter the consequences. Stephen sets the shuttle's course, the coordinates locked in. Beside him, Zephyr rests a hand on his shoulder, her touch a silent promise. They've come this far together, through pain and sacrifice. Whatever lies ahead, they'll face it as one, united by a bond that transcends species and allegiance. The shuttle hurtles through the void, carrying two battered warriors towards an uncertain future, their fates entwined with the destiny of worlds. The stars sweep past, cold and infinite, bearing witness to a struggle as old as time itself. The fight for survival, for hope, for a tomorrow yet unwritten. The stolen shuttle streaked across the Talaxian sky, its engines straining as Stephen pushed it to its limits. Beside him, Zephyr's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for their target. "There," she said, pointing to a jagged line of peaks. "The mineral extractors are hidden within those mountains." Stephen brought the shuttle down in a narrow valley, concealing it behind a rocky outcropping. As they exited, the alien wind whipped around them, carrying the acrid scent of industrial runoff. Zephyr led the way, her steps sure and swift as she navigated the treacherous terrain. Stephen followed close behind, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. They reached a seemingly blank rock face, but Zephyr's deft fingers found a hidden catch. A section of stone slid away, revealing a dark passage into the mountain's heart. The tunnel was barely wide enough for them to walk single file. Stephen's shoulders brushed the rough-hewn walls as they descended deeper into the earth. The air grew thick and oppressive, laden with the scent of minerals and ozone. As they moved, Stephen's hands were busy. He pulled components from his pack: power cells, detonators, explosive compounds. With practiced efficiency, he assembled crude but effective charges. "These should do the job," he muttered, more to himself than to Zephyr. "Plant them at key structural points and the whole place comes down." They pressed on, the silence broken only by their footsteps and the occasional distant rumble of machinery. Suddenly, Zephyr held up a hand, freezing in place. Stephen tensed, his hand moving to his weapon. Voices echoed from around the next bend, a Talaxian mining patrol. Stephen met Zephyr's eyes, a silent plan forming between them. She nodded and melted into the shadows. Stephen stepped out, his weapon raised. The Talaxians reacted with shock, fumbling for their own arms. But Stephen was faster. His first shot took down the lead miner, the second and third following in quick succession. As the last Talaxian fell, Zephyr's voice crackled over their comlink. "I found a control room. Give me a moment." Stephen heard the faint sound of her fingers flying over alien keyboards. Then, with a hum, the shimmering force field blocking their path winked out of existence. They pushed deeper into the facility, Stephen's trained eye noting optimal placement points for his explosives. As he worked, Zephyr tapped into the facility's computer network, downloading vital intelligence. An alarm shattered the tense quiet. Red lights flashed, bathing the tunnels in an eerie glow. Stephen cursed, his fingers working even faster to plant the remaining charges. "Time to go," he barked, grabbing Zephyr's arm. They ran, the sound of booted feet echoing behind them. Talaxian security forces poured into the tunnels, energy weapons spitting deadly bolts. Stephen and Zephyr found themselves back to back, surrounded. They moved in perfect sync, Stephen's rifle barking as Zephyr's energy pistol whined. Talaxians fell before their combined onslaught, but more kept coming. "The exit tunnel," Zephyr gasped between shots. "It's our only chance." They fought their way forward, step by bloody step. The mouth of the tunnel loomed ahead, promising escape. Then a Talaxian grenade arced through the air, detonating with a thunderous roar. The tunnel mouth collapsed, a wall of rock and debris separating Stephen and Zephyr. Through the settling dust, Stephen saw Zephyr's shocked face on the other side of the cave-in. "Go!" she shouted, her voice muffled by the rock. "Complete the mission!" Stephen hesitated for a heartbeat, then made his choice. He triggered the detonator, and the mountain shook as his charges ignited. The tunnels began to collapse around him as he ran, dodging falling rocks and leaping over widening chasms. He burst out into the open air, gasping and covered in dust. Behind him, the mountain was collapsing in on itself, taking the Talaxians' precious mineral extractors with it. But Stephen's victory felt hollow. He stared at the ruined mountain, knowing Zephyr was still trapped inside. Without a second thought, he gathered what gear he could salvage and plunged back into the collapsing tunnels. The next hours were a blur of crawling, climbing, and digging. Stephen's muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed on, following the faint signal from Zephyr's life signs monitor. Finally, he broke through into a small pocket of open space. There, half buried under a pile of rubble, lay Zephyr. Her purple skin was pale, covered in dust and blood, but her chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. Stephen's heart leapt as he pulled her free. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. "You came back," she whispered. "Always," Stephen replied, helping her to her feet. "We're in this together, remember? To the end." Zephyr nodded, her strength returning. "Then let's finish what we started. The Talaxian regime won't fall on its own." Supporting each other, human and Talaxian began the long climb back to the surface. Their bond forged anew in the crucible of battle and sacrifice. Stephen and Zephyr burst from the collapsing tunnels, coughing and covered in dust. Without a word, they sprinted towards the Talaxian fighter craft sitting on a nearby landing pad. Stephen's fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls, bringing the engines to life with a roar. They lifted off just as the last of the mining facility crumbled into rubble. As they soared away from the destruction, Zephyr's eyes widened. We did it. We actually did it. Stephen nodded grimly. One battle won, but the war's just getting started. Back at their hidden base, Stephen pored over intercepted Talaxian transmissions. His face grew taut as he deciphered the coded messages. Zephyr, they're mobilizing. A massive force, headed straight for your home settlement. Zephyr's purple skin paled. No, we have to warn them to do something. We will, Stephen said, his voice steely with commitment. We're going to beat the Talaxians there and turn your village into a fortress. They raced against time, pushing their stolen craft to its limits. Upon landing, Zephyr's impassioned plea galvanized her people into action. Stephen wasted no time, barking orders and demonstrating guerrilla tactics. Use the terrain to your advantage, he shouted, showing a group how to dig concealed foxholes. Hit them hard, then melt away before they can respond. Days blurred together as the village transformed. Crude barricades rose, fashioned from scavenged metal and rubble. Stephen taught them to craft makeshift explosives, while Zephyr's knowledge of Talaxian weak points proved invaluable. The first sign of the enemy's approach was a distant rumble. Stephen climbed to a rooftop, his enhanced vision picking out the dust clouds on the horizon. They're here, he growled into his comm. Talaxian gunships screamed overhead, raining energy bolts. But the villagers were ready. Hidden anti-aircraft batteries, cobbled together from mining equipment, opened fire. 2 gunships spiraled out of control, crashing into the surrounding hills. On the ground, Talaxian tanks rolled forward, only to be met by a hail of fire from concealed positions. Stephen led a daring raid, sprinting between enemy vehicles and planting explosives. The resulting chain of explosions threw the Talaxian advance into chaos. Zephyr coordinated the defense from a makeshift command center, her voice calm over the comms as she directed reinforcements to weak points. Stephen became a blur of motion, appearing wherever the fighting was thickest, his human reflexes and strength turning the tide again and again. But the Talaxians kept coming. Bodies piled up on both sides, the air thick with smoke and the scent of ozone from energy weapons. Stephen saw the fear in the villagers' eyes, knew they were on the verge of breaking. Then came the ominous silence, followed by a voice booming from Talaxian speakers. Lay down your arms or be obliterated from orbit. Stephen's mind raced. He turned to Zephyr. Their communications. Can we hack them? Her eyes lit up. Yes, but... Do it! Stephen ordered, already sprinting towards the enemy lines. What followed was a risky move. As Zephyr worked her tech magic, Stephen fought his way to the Talaxian command post. His rifle blazed, cutting down soldiers left and right. He reached the communications array just as Zephyr's voice crackled in his ear. We're in. Stephen's fingers danced over the alien keyboard, inputting false coordinates. He dove clear as Talaxian energy bolts sizzled past, rolling to his feet and sprinting back to friendly lines. The orbital strike came down like the wrath of an angry god, on empty desert miles from the village. The Talaxian troops, already demoralized, fell into disarray. And then came the war cries. From the hills around the village poured hundreds of newly arrived Talaxian rebels, inspired by tales of the human warrior and his allies. They fell upon the reeling Talaxian forces like a tidal wave. In the aftermath, as the last pockets of resistance were mopped up, Stephen stood atop a ruined Talaxian tank. Cheering crowds surrounded him, a sea of purple faces looking to him with hope and admiration. Zephyr appeared at his side, her eyes shining. This is just the beginning, Stephen said, his voice carrying across the battlefield. We've won a great victory here today, but there are more battles to come. The Talaxian regime will not fall easily, and beyond that, Earth itself is still in danger. He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. Who's with me? The roar of approval shook the very ground. Stephen felt a fierce joy rising in his chest. This was what he was meant for. This was a cause worth fighting for, and fight he would, until every last Talaxian was free, and Earth was safe from alien threats. As the cheers continued, Stephen's mind was already racing, planning their next move. The war had only just begun. The cheers of victory faded as Stephen and Zephyr plunged deeper into the fight against the Talaxian regime. Weeks blurred into months as they led daring raids across the planet, striking at the heart of the oppressor's power. Stephen crouched behind a crumbling wall, his breath coming in short gasps. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead, scorching the air. He glanced at Zephyr, her purple skin streaked with grime and sweat. She nodded, readying her weapon. They burst from cover, weapons blazing. Talaxian guards fell before their onslaught. More rebels poured in behind them, freed prisoners joining the fight with makeshift weapons and raw fury. But their victories came at a cost. As they liberated another prison camp, Stephen saw the haunted look in Zephyr's eyes. "My parents," she whispered. "They're not here." The news came days later. Zephyr's parents, along with scores of other dissidents, had been transferred to the capital for public execution. Stephen gripped Zephyr's shoulders as she shook with rage and grief. "We'll get them out," he vowed. They assembled a strike team, the best of their rebel forces. Under cover of darkness, they infiltrated the sprawling capital city. Stephen led the way, his enhanced senses on high alert as they navigated the maze-like streets. They reached the prison complex, a towering monstrosity of steel and stone. Stephen's fingers flew over the security panel, bypassing layers of encryption. The gates slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, chaos erupted. Alarms blared as rebels engaged Talaxian guards in fierce close-quarters combat. Stephen and Zephyr fought their way deeper into the complex, desperately searching for the condemned prisoners. A plasma bolt caught Stephen in the side, searing through his armor. He stumbled, grimacing in pain. Zephyr dragged him behind a pillar, returning fire with deadly accuracy. "Go!" Stephen gasped. "Find your parents. I'll hold them off." Zephyr hesitated, torn between duty and love. Stephen pushed her away. "Go!" He stood, ignoring the burning agony in his side. His rifle roared as he cut down wave after wave of Talaxian guards. But they kept coming, and Stephen felt his strength ebbing away with each passing second. A stun blast caught him in the chest, and darkness claimed him. Stephen awoke to cold metal against his back and the acrid taste of blood in his mouth. He blinked, focusing on the sneering face of the Talaxian Supreme Commander looming over him. "The mighty human warrior," the commander mocked. "Not so mighty now." Stephen spat blood at the tyrant's feet. His eyes darted around, landing on Zephyr. She was bound and bloody, but her eyes still burned with defiance. The commander gestured, and two guards dragged in a pair of battered Talaxians, Zephyr's parents. Stephen struggled against his bonds as the commander raised a plasma pistol. "Watch closely, human," the tyrant snarled. "This is the price of rebellion." Two shots rang out. Zephyr screamed as her parents crumpled to the ground. The commander turned back to Stephen, his eyes glinting with malice. And now, the coup de grace. He activated a holographic display, revealing schematics for a horrific bioweapon. "Engineered to target human DNA. Your precious Earth will be a graveyard within days." Stephen glared at the tyrant, his voice low and dangerous. "You won't win. Earth will stop you." The commander laughed. "Earth doesn't even know we exist. By the time they realize the threat, it will be far too late." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the complex. The floor shook as explosions rocked the building. The commander's eyes widened in shock. "Impossible," he breathed. Stephen grinned through bloodied teeth. "Never underestimate humanity." Chaos erupted as the orbital bombardment began. Stephen seized his chance, breaking free from his restraints and lunging at the commander. They grappled fiercely, crashing into consoles and equipment. Despite his injuries, Stephen's fury gave him strength. He slammed the commander's head against a metal beam, stunning the tyrant. With a final surge of effort, Stephen wrenched the bioweapon canister from the commander's grasp. Zephyr had freed herself in the chaos. She stood over the dazed commander, her eyes blazing with vengeance. "This is for my parents," she snarled, striking the killing blow. They raced through the crumbling palace, dodging falling debris and pockets of remaining resistance. They burst into the shuttle hangar just as another explosion rocked the building. Stephen and Zephyr clambered into the last remaining shuttle. Stephen's fingers danced over the controls, bringing the engines to life. They blasted out of the hangar, narrowly avoiding a collapsing support beam. The shuttle screamed through the atmosphere, weaving between streaks of weapons fire from the human fleet above. As they breached the upper atmosphere, Stephen and Zephyr beheld the awesome sight of the Talaxian armada surrendering to the Earth forces. Stephen activated the comm system, transmitting their coordinates for pickup. As the shuttle drifted in the void of space, he turned to Zephyr. No words were needed. They held each other tightly, sharing in the grief of all they had lost and the hope for what was yet to come. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. As Stephen gazed out at the stars, he knew that forging peace between humans and Talaxians would be his greatest challenge yet. But with Zephyr by his side, he was ready to face whatever the future might bring.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.